Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During the discussion, there will be question and answer sessions. To ask a question, please press star followed by the number 1. This call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this point. Now, I will turn the meeting over to your host, Mr. Andrew Howard. You may begin.
Thank you for joining us on today's conference call with NFL Network analyst Mike Mayock to preview the upcoming 2018 NFL Scouting Combine. Before I turn it over to Mike for opening remarks and then questions, a few quick NFL Network programming notes for the Combine. NFL Network provides exclusive live coverage of the 2018 NFL Scouting Combine on-field drills Friday, March 2nd through Monday, March 5th, starting each day at 9 a.m. Eastern. Mike is joined by Rich Eisen in the booth, providing live coverage of each day, along with NFL Network analyst Charles Davis, Daniel Jeremiah, and more. For the third year in a row, Carolina Panthers tight end Greg Olsen joins NFL Network's Combine coverage of the quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends on Saturday, March 3rd. NFL Now Live airs Friday, March 2nd through Monday, March 5th at 9 a.m. Eastern on NFL.com, the NFL app, and Yahoo.com with Bucky Brooks, Lance Zierlein, Maurice Jones-Drew, Matt Money Smith, Colleen Wolfe, and James Palmer providing live coverage of the Combine. Finally, NFL Network provides live coverage of Combine press conferences on Wednesday, February 28th and Thursday, March 1st, starting each day at 1 p.m. Eastern. And now I'll turn over to Mike for any opening remarks before we take any questions. Mike?
Thanks, Andrew. Just basically 30 seconds to a minute overview, and I'd like to start on last year's draft first. 63 of 107 players that went in the first 3 rounds were on defense. That was by far the most ever. It was a defensive draft in 07. It was also the worst offensive line year ever as far as offensive line guys drafted. There were 33 total, none in the top 15, and only 2 in the first round. Typically, we get 44 offensive linemen drafted in a typical draft. So it's kind of amazing to look at that and ask the question, why? Beyond that, the running back impact last year was really good at the top end. The first 6 running backs taken were outstanding. The wide receiver production has been down since the historic 2014 draft. Outside of that, I'm going to open it up other than saying I don't do my team needs analysis until after free agency. So if you want to talk about Cleveland or Pittsburgh or first round, kind of tell me what positions you're interested in, okay? Thanks very much.
And now I'll turn it over to our moderator to take questions for Mike. Please note that due to the large number of media we have on today's call, we ask that you please ask one question and please refrain from asking any follow-ups. Thank you. Moderator, we may begin.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press star followed by the number 1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. To cancel your request, press star 2. And our first question comes from Mike Reese with ESPN. Your line is now open. You may proceed.
All right. Thanks for having me. Hope to lead it off strong here, Mike. Quarterbacks would be the position that I'm curious about for the Patriots. We all know the background with them trading Garoppolo, Brissett. We know the assets they have in the draft, the late 1, 2 2s, the late 3 and 4. From your studying and what you think the Patriots might value, any of these young quarterbacks jumping off the page to you in terms of what might fit for them?
Mike, do you think they're going to go for one at 31?
I'd be surprised, Mike, but you never know with him, right?
You don't. And you know, historically what he's shown you, and you can go back to before Garoppolo and Brissett, he took a 3rd-round pick on Ryan Mallett. So it's been 2nd and 3rd-round picks with the anticipation of Tom Brady having to retire someday. Yep. And it's getting more and more urgent, obviously. So if you kind of take a look out there, the one way outside the box conversation is Lamar Jackson, who I think is the most electrifying player in this draft. And I think somebody is going to take him and commit their offensive philosophy to him. Yep. And I would tell you that the most nervous 31 people in the league would be the defensive coordinators that would have to play against him. Now, it's a different kind of commitment and a different kind of philosophy, and I'm not suggesting the Patriots are going to do that. I just want to get that out there in general for anybody looking at quarterbacks. As far as the Patriots are concerned, I think there are some interesting second and third round potential quarterbacks this year. You know, I think Mason Rudolph from Oklahoma State is a really logical player, prototypical drop back type of guy. I don't think he has great escapability, but I think he can do what the Patriots offense asks him to do. Along with him, I would say Luke Falk and Mike White, I think, are very interesting players. And then a notch below that, I'd say Kyle Lauletta and Logan Woodside. Now, if you look at the 5 potential first-rounders plus Mason Rudolph, Falk, White, Lauletta, and Woodside, that's 10 quarterbacks. In a typical draft, only about 11 to 12 quarterbacks get drafted overall. So I think there's a little bit better quality at the top end through 3 or 4 rounds than we're used to seeing in the quarterback draft.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Dan Widerer with Chicago Tribune. Your line is now open. You may proceed.
Hey, Mike. Overall, over the years, what have you found are some of the biggest challenges that evaluators face in assessing receivers coming into the draft? And then specific to this class, where do you see the greatest promise in Ridley?
It's a great question because I think the wide receiver position since the 2014 class, you go back to that class and Watkins, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham, Cooks, and Kelvin Benjamin were the 5 first-round guys, all of whom played at a high level quickly. Since that draft class, there's been 13 first-round wide receivers, and I think only 1 Pro Bowl, and that was Amari Cooper. And the rest of them have struggled to have any kind of production. So I think there are really 3 things. One is the lack of quality press coverage in college football. It's hard to watch wideouts get challenged realistically at the line of scrimmage on tape. Number 2, it's a whole different conversation about the complexities of NFL defenses versus what a lot of these kids are seeing in college football. And number 3, I'm getting to the point where I'm kind of going, you know, there were 3 first-round wide receivers a year ago, Corey Davis, Mike Williams, John Ross. All 3 of them had hints of durability issues. All 3 of them struggled to get on the field last year because of injury. The production was way down. So I'm kind of going, on top of everything else, we need to be more aware of any kind of history of injury with the wide receiver class, and also, what does it take to be successful? And I think what you're starting to see are guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, Devin Funchess, some of those kind of 6'3", 6'4", 220-pound wide receivers that are physical and tough with great ball skills. They seem to be the kind of guys that can come in, and I would throw Cooper Kupp in there, and compete immediately. Now, wide receiver this year, you mentioned Calvin Ridley. I think he and Christian Kirk are the 2 best route runners in this class. Neither of them has great size, but they're both fast and quick. They run great routes. I think Ridley's challenge is going to be the complexities of defensive schemes in the NFL. Next question, please.
Our next question comes from Jim White with Titans Online. Your line is now open.
Mike, things are obviously different for John Robinson this year, picking 25 instead of in the top 10. What kind of player can Titans get at 25? I guess it's another way of asking that. What's the depth like in the draft if you're picking 25th and looking for a player that can fit you?
Yeah, who do you think you'd be looking for? What kind of position?
Anywhere from edge rush, interior offensive line, running back, extra.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think the interior O-line and D-line, the way I look at them is I think inside out right now are their priorities. And if you're looking inside out as an interior offensive lineman, I think there are a lot of really good. I think Quinton Nelson will be gone. And then after that, it's going to be interesting how the first round plays out. So in the first round, I mean, Isaiah Wynn, James Daniels, either of them are probably on the board, but Will Hernandez and Billy Price are really good football players also. I think you can be looking in the first or second round at any of those four guys as far as interior offensive linemen are concerned, and even a Braden Smith from Auburn in the second or third round. In the defensive line, the interior defensive line, it's stacked early. And I think the guys that can rush the quarterback are going to be gone quickly. Vita Vea, Maurice Hurst, Deron Payne. I think a guy that Payne and Taven Bryan may or may not be on the board at that point. Taven Bryan is intriguing to me. He can play the 5 technique, which is what the base is in Tennessee. He can also kick down as a sub rusher. I think he's interesting. And I think in the second or third round, an ascending talent is Andrew Brown from Virginia.
Our next question comes from Sam Farmer with LA Times. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. I'm particularly interested in Sam Darnold and Josh Rosen. Best I can tell, the only time the UCLA and USC quarterbacks were selected in the same draft was back with Rodney Peete going in the 6th round after Troy Aikman went first. So this figures to be a historic draft in that regard. And I wonder what your initial assessment is of these two guys. Could these both, conceivably be top 5 picks? And, did Darnold make a mistake in coming out after a sort of a substandard year for him?
Tough questions, especially when you look at what we do with the quarterback talent every year. We push it up crazy high. Last year I was really surprised at how quickly quarterbacks came off the board, and I probably shouldn't be given the history at that position. So I look at Darnold, and right now I have him as my number 1 quarterback, and the reason I do is I think he's got plus size, plus arm strength, outstanding athlete, and I really like the way he extends plays inside and outside of the pocket. And when he scrambles or moves, it's with the intent of getting the ball down the field. His eyes are always up. Now, the flip side to Darnold are the turnovers, and not just interceptions, but fumbles. And he's got a history of fumbling going back to high school. But I think fumbling can be controlled in the pocket. I think that's one of the few things you can learn in the pocket as an NFL quarterback is how to keep both hands on the football and control some of the fumbling. He is a gunslinger, and he will put the ball up for grabs at times, but he can play in all 32 cities. He can play indoors. He can play outdoors. As far as Rosen is concerned, he's the best pure thrower, best pure passer I've seen in several years. I mean, he's on balance on every throw. He's accurate, short, intermediate, and deep. The problem I have with him is there's a durability issue, the shoulder issue in 16, 2 concussions in 17, and when you combine that with an inability to escape from the pocket, I'm concerned. I'm concerned whether or not he can play enough games to make a significant dent in the NFL. So I love his talent, but I'm very worried about his ability to survive. Having said all that, I think Darnold's going to go in the first few picks, and it's way too early to even say that, Sam. I haven't even met Sam Darnold yet. So I don't really bang the table with quarterbacks until I've met the kid and get a feel for him like a Carson Wentz. But that's kind of my overview off watching 5 or 6 games of tape of each of them.
That's great stuff. Thank you very much, Mike.
Our next question comes from Mark Gahn with Buffalo News. Your line is now open.
Okay. Could you give us, just outside of the first round, fast coverage linebackers you like?
Coverage linebackers that won't go in the first round?
Yes.
Sure. I think we're going to get 3 or 4 in the first round, which would be Tremaine Edmonds, Roquan Smith, perhaps Layton Vander, Esch, who I'm kind of intrigued by, and perhaps Rashaan Evans. After that, I think Uchenna Nwosu from USC is an intriguing guy. He was primarily an edge rusher, is probably going to have to do what Hassan Reddick did a year ago out of Temple, which is stand up, play off-the-ball linebacker, and then perhaps be used in the sub-packages as kind of a joker rusher. And Nwosu is really interesting. Jerome Baker's problem from Ohio State is probably going to go to the combine and run 4.5 at 225 pounds. He's a physical specimen. He can run. Some of his tape's inconsistent. I didn't like the Iowa tape at all, but I think there were some mitigating circumstances. He can fly. Darius Leonard, South Carolina State. Another sideline-to-sideline player, good in the pass game. This Fred Warner from BYU, same thing. He can run. I think they're the logical off-the-ball linebackers for the first 2, 3, 4 rounds.
Our next question comes from Rich Campbell with Chicago Tribune. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. You alluded to the receivers a bit earlier, but I was hoping you could explain in a bit more detail the strengths and weaknesses of your top 3 receivers, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, and Courtland Sutton.
Sure. Ridley and Kirk are somewhat similar in size. They're probably, I like them both in the slot, although I think Ridley might be a little bit faster, but I'm anxious to see them both at the combine speed-wise. But I think Ridley can play outside, but he will become predominantly a slot receiver in the NFL. Same with Kirk. They both run tremendous routes. They both have really good hands, and they're very tough catching the football with good run after catch. Christian Kirk adds some value in the return game. Courtland Sutton is a completely different animal. 6'4", 215, 220, high-level production, but a lot of it's outside the numbers. Keep in mind, there are a lot of ways to separate in today's NFL. We used to talk about quickness and speed and route running. There's another way to separate now, and that's with size. Back shoulder fades, the outside the number throws. He's mostly kind of a fade, stop, pitch, and slant player right now. There's not much of a route tree. I'm anxious to see how fast he is. Can he be a Mike Evans-type player? Mike Evans ran 4.53 at the combine at 230 pounds. Or is he more of a 4.58 type of guy? I think Courtland Sutton is really going to be an intriguing guy to watch at the combine.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Ryan Mink with Baltimore Ravens. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. For the Ravens, they're looking for weapons, kind of like the Bears, looking at wide receiver and tight ends. Who are some of the guys that you feel like, beyond some of those first-round guys that you were just talking about, that could be a good fit for the Ravens and you expect to see off the board probably in round 2 and 3?
Yeah, and it probably needs to be an offensive draft for the Ravens this year. And I'm with you. I just say who can make a difference. It doesn't matter what you call it. It doesn't matter if you call it a wideout or a tight end or an H-back or whatever. Who can make a difference? And you start looking in the second and third rounds. And right now the wide receiver position is really cloudy. I mean, I've talked with my buddy Daniel Jeremiah about this. I've talked with a bunch of guys around the league. And there are different flavors at wide receiver. And after Ridley and Kirk, this draft could go anywhere at the wide receiver position. So just quickly threw in several names. I mean, James Washington from Oklahoma State is a vertical guy. He's a late 1 to late 2. Dante Pettis from Washington, great return specialist, slot receiver, second or third round guy. DJ Moore from Maryland has some juice, like him, probably a slot receiver. Anthony Miller from Memphis, fast and quick. Really good hand. DJ Chark, LSU, has been ascending since the Senior Bowl. Deion Kane, Clemson, reminds me of Kenny Stills. Might be a little bit undervalued. Will probably run in the 4.4 range. Jamon Moore, Mizzou, big kid. Too many drops, but a height, weight, speed guy. And, you start throwing in Cedric Wilson and Equanimous St. Brown and Jordan Lasley. In all honesty, I might have a guy as a second rounder and another evaluator might have him as a fourth rounder. I think the second through the fourth rounds at the wide receiver position, people are going to be all over depending on what they're looking for. At tight end, I don't know if any of them are going in the first round. I have Hayden Hirsch number 1 because I think he blocks a little bit also. But Dallas Goedert, Mike Gesicki, Mark Andrews, they're all kind of matchups. Tight ends. Think of Zach Ertz in Philadelphia as a potential example. Ian Thomas from Indiana. they're the logical tight end wide receiver group in kind of the second, third, fourth round.
Thank you.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Bob Kravitz with NBC Indianapolis. Your line is now open.
Yeah, hi, Mike. If you're the Colts at number 3, is Bradley Chubb kind of a plug-and-play no-brainer at that spot, or is Saquon Barkley the kind of transformational back who might merit selection at that spot, or is there somebody else who I'm not thinking of?
Well, I think there are at least 4 different difference makers at the top end that are also clean off the field that it would all fit Indianapolis. And if you discount the idea of trading down, which I think they have to be aware of, especially given the quarterback rush this year. So I think you have to be aware of trading down. And then B, after that, Chubb is definitely worth a pick. Saquon Barkley is a transformational back, and I would put him in the same category as Fournette, Gurley, and Zeke Elliott, all of whom have been top 10 picks and made their teams better immediately. I would throw Quinton Nelson, the guard from Notre Dame, in there, and Minkah Fitzpatrick, the safety/corner from Alabama, and for some teams, Vita Vea, defensive tackle. So to me, they're kind of like the 5 guys where you go, wow, you can plug and play, but I'd also be aware in Indianapolis of a potential trade down.
Thank you.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Paul Domowitch with Philadelphia Daily News. Your line is now open.
Yeah, Mike, I was curious, getting back to the quarterbacks, how many do you see potentially right now as possible first-rounders? And I wanted to ask you about the kid from Richmond, Kyle Laletta. Where do you see him going, and what are your thoughts on him as a potential starter in the NFL?
Lalletta's a Philly kid, isn't he? Like maybe is he Westchester or
Downingtown East.
Yeah, Downingtown East. Mike Matta, I think, was his high school coach then.
Mm-hmm.
He's an interesting guy and had a really good – the Senior Bowl has propelled a lot of quarterbacks in the last 15 years. Not necessarily just first-round guys, but other guys. And I think he opened some eyes at the Senior Bowl. It's a very solid, does everything well, maybe does not have any one elite trait, but does everything pretty well. Case Keenum reminds me of that a little bit, those kind of traits when he came out. So I think he kind of went from an afterthought to somebody that could legitimately be a third or fourth round quarterback in the NFL. As far as the quarterbacks that could go in the first round, I think you're looking at Darnold, Allen, Rosen, Baker Mayfield, and the wild card in this whole thing for me is Lamar Jackson, and I think Mason Rudolph from Oklahoma State I don't think he's going there, but you know, I have him in the second round, Damo, but the way things are going in today's NFL, who knows?
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Nate Ulrich with Akron Beacon. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. With the Browns at number 1, and specifically looking at quarterback, I know you talked about Darnold and Rosen a little bit earlier, but how close do you think it is? I've seen your positional rankings, and you have Darnold 1, but how close do you think it is in terms of the quarterbacks who could possibly be taken there? And who do you think, the contenders are? I mean, is it just Darnold and Rosen? Do you think Allen's in the mix, Mayfield at all?
I've got Allen at number 2, so obviously I think he's in the mix more so than Josh Rosen. And I think you have to kind of look at it from John Dorsey's point of view also, and look at what he did a year ago in Kansas City when he traded up to number 10 for the biggest arm quarterback in that draft, in Patrick Mahomes. And the biggest arm quarterback I've seen since Jamarcus Russell is Josh Allen. So I think when you're the GM of Cleveland, and you got to be thinking about the weather, you're playing outside, you need a big arm. His new offensive coordinator came over from Pittsburgh, and he's used to Ben Roethlisberger. So, to me, Josh Allen has to be in that conversation at 1 or 4, along with Darnold. Perhaps Rosen and Mayfield, but I think this is just my gut. I think Darnold and Allen are the two guys they would consider the most highly.
Our next question comes from Bill Rabinowitz with the Columbus Dispatch. Your line is now open.
Yes, Mike. Ohio State has 11 players going to the combine, but Denzel Ward is considered the only first-round lock, and that Billy Price could go then too. What's your view of the Ohio State group, and are there some who really caught your eye? And I'm also curious about J.T. Barrett. Your thoughts on him?
You know what? I didn't get any of that. It was all muddled, and I know you're asking me about Ohio State. Can you clear that up for me?
Yeah. Ohio State has 11 players going to the combine, but Denzel Ward is considered the only first-round lock, although Price could go there too. What's your view of the Ohio State group, and are there some who have caught your eye? And I'm also particularly curious about your thoughts on J.T. Barrett.
Sure. I think they're tied with Alabama for 33 players to the combine in the last 3 years. Kind of crazy. Denzel Ward, to me, is a top 10 pick in this draft. Billy Price, to me, the center/guard, is a late 1 to mid 2, a solid plug-and-play guy. The defensive end, Hubbard, is not flashy, but he's going to come in and start immediately for somebody, probably second round, worst case, third round. I already mentioned Baker, the linebacker, who I think is going to light up this combine. He's got some good tape and he's got some not so good tape, but I think his physical specifications match up with today's NFL. The left tackle, Jamarco Jones, probably a third or fourth round type of guy. Very solid player. The free safety, I think, is more of a third day guy. Is there anybody specifically you want me to?
Yeah, J.T. Barrett for one.
Oh, I'm sorry, J.T. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Denzel Ward, is he just a lock to be probably a top 10, top 15 worst case scenario?
I think he is. I think the only question about him is how light and lean he is. So that I think the physicality, he tackles. I'm not questioning his physicality, just potential durability over time. But I think he's going to be a top 10 pick, more than a top 15 pick. But a lot of that depends on how many quarterbacks go early. J.T. Barrett is a hard one for me because I love the kid. I got to meet him a little bit at the East-West game, and you can see all the leadership attributes. Everything you want in your quarterback he has, except for the high-level talent. So from my perspective, he's probably going to be a later third-day guy, and somebody's going to buy into him because they love the kid and what he brings to the table in the meeting room and try to give him a chance to develop over time. I think he's an ideal backup or third quarterback, and I think he'll play in the league for a lot of years.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Darius Slater with Newark Star Ledger. Your line is now open.
Yeah, Mike, regarding the Jets, I just want to throw a couple scenarios out there for you. If they do get Kirk Cousins, presume they'll potentially target a D-back at 6 if they stay there. Could you just give me some D-backs you think they could fit there? Could Ward, or is he too small? And then if they don't get Cousins, who do you think is the best quarterback fit for them based on the guys likely to be available at 6?
Yeah, I mean, it's a crapshoot as to who's going to be their quarterback. I mean, obviously you've got in front of you quarterback needs from the Browns at 1 and 4, the Giants at 2, and Denver at 5. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot, even, especially a couple of months in advance. But from my perspective, if they were able to sign Cousins, the corner that makes the most sense is Denzel Ward. And I think everybody's trying to figure out the rest of the corners. And I think the most intriguing corner in this draft is going to have a big week next week, one way or the other, and that's Josh Jackson, the corner from Iowa. He had 8 interceptions. He's only been a D-back for 2 years. He was a wide receiver coming into the program. He's instinctive. He's got some length. The question is, how fast is he? And I think the answer to that will determine where he ends up going. I've heard second and third round grades. I've heard first round grades. But I think the only corner right now that you could bang the table for in the top 10 would be Denzel Ward. And as far as what quarterbacks make sense, I mean, I think Darnold, Allen, Rosen, and Mayfield are all on the board right now for the New York Jets, and they're trying to figure out what their own priority, what their own order is. I would think the Browns are going to take one regardless. I think the Giants would be up in the air, and Denver's got to get a quarterback, but who knows if that's going to be free agency or not.
Our next question comes from Patrick Finlay with Chicago Sun-Times. Your line is now open.
I'm curious, if you're a 3-4 team and if you're looking at Edmonds from Virginia Tech, is he an inside or an outside, and what skills do you see there that leads you to think that?
The beauty of this kid is he's 19 years old. He's 6'5", 250. And 19 years old. He doesn't turn 20 till a couple days after the draft. I put the first tape in on this kid, and today he's an off-the-ball linebacker, meaning in a 3-4 he's an inside linebacker, and he'd be great there. He also has a scary skill set as an edge rusher, which he did a little bit at Virginia Tech, and I know for sure he's working on that now. So I see incredible upside. I see an off-the-ball linebacker. I think some of the 3-4 teams could look at him and say he could be a 34 outside linebacker, in addition to being a 34 inside linebacker. But right now what I see is a starting off-the-ball linebacker and a potential sub-edge rusher. He's got a skill set. I don't use this word often, but he has a skill set that's unique.
I was going to say, does he remind you of anybody?
No, that's my point. That's the definition of unique. There's only one of them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Team 20 Man with Detroit Alliance. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, when you look at the Detroit Lions at number 20, they obviously have a need for running back, interior defensive lineman, and also a pass rusher. When you look at the pass rushing position in particular, who are some guys maybe at number 20 who might be there, who might be a fit for them?
Sure. They're a four-man front team. I think Chubb will be gone. I'm guessing Marcus Davenport will be gone. Is there okay, that sounds better. Marcus Davenport will probably be gone. If he's not, I would jump all over him at 20. Arden Key from LSU is a really talented kid with some off-the-field issues. His character's got to be checked, but he's gifted. They're the three primary 4-3 edge guys. Beyond that, it's hard because there's a lot of 34 smaller, quicker edge guys, but not the 4-3 guys like you'd like to see. A Tyquan Lewis could be available in the second or third round, but I think if you're Detroit and you're looking for the edge, it would be Marcus Davenport, Arden Key, or you've also got to look at running back and, as you said, I believe, interior offensive line.
Our next question comes from Mike Chappell with CBS4 in Indianapolis. Your line is now open.
Mike, if you put yourself in Chris Ballard's seat and you're sitting at 3, this is a roster that needs a lot of help at all positions, very few playmakers. Do you get more bang for your buck staying at 3 and trying and getting one of those guys with Chubb or Barkley, or is there more value in moving back and trying to get more players, but maybe not the difference-making players? What's your option on that?
I think he has to be open for business, number one. They've got as you mentioned, they've got a variety of needs. And I think the NFL is all about filling needs in free agency and the draft. That's what it's all about. That's why the Eagles turned it around in 2 years. So it's about filling needs, and they've got a bunch of them. So I think the day before the draft, or even the day of the draft, you're hoping they're getting an awful lot of people that want to come up ahead of Cleveland at 4, ahead of Denver at 5, and get a quarterback. And depending on where who has the draft capital to move up, I think you have to listen. You have to be open for business. And I think that's the best of all worlds. If you can move down from 3 to somewhere else in the top 10, that's the best of all worlds. And I'm not sure that's happening because, quite frankly, 7 through 10 don't even have quarterback needs. So you listen to what's being offered, and you got to weigh that against a Barkley or a Chubb or a Quinton Nelson, and they're really, really good football players. So it's kind of like you want one really good football player with a chance to be an all-pro quickly, or do you want to try to satisfy 3 or 4 needs with a trade down? And I don't think you can have that answer until you know what's in front of you on the day of the draft.
You wouldn't slip further than like 10 if you're trading down, though, would you?
What's that?
You wouldn't go much further than like 10 if you're trading back, though, would you?
I would rather stay in the top. I would rather stay in the top 10 if possible. But again, if you were able to get multiple 1s and 2s and all that, that's a whole different conversation. And then you got to trust your draft board.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Eric Branch with San Francisco Chronicle. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to ask you about Alex Kappa of Humboldt State. Did he surprise you at all at the Senior Bowl, or from what you had seen on tape previously, if anything, were you expecting him to be, fairly impressive?
So here's what happens with me leading up to the Senior Bowl. I'm grinding tape of all these guys I've never heard of, and about 19 out of 20 of them are just guys. But you got to grind the tape, you got to get through it, and every year a couple guys pop out that you go, who's that? Wow, that was fun. And for me this year, he was one of my guys. Humboldt State, I didn't even know where it was. I think it's the first time I've ever looked at a Humboldt State guy. And he was so nasty on tape. And keep in mind, obviously, it's a lower level of competition, but he's throwing people around like it's nothing. And he's got a nasty demeanor. He's got a tough edge to him. But more importantly, he had some movement skills and size also. So I couldn't wait to see him at the Senior Bowl. I thought he handled himself well. And what he looks like to me is, even though he played tackle, I think his skill set lends itself to guard. I think he's going to get drafted somewhere in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. And I really like the kid. I think he's a developmental guard prospect that's got a chance to play down the road.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Jordan Rodriguez with Charlotte Observer. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for your time today. We talk a lot about the flat-out ability of receivers, but not, I guess, so much how these specific skill sets could fit with the quarterbacking scheme. So I'm wondering, what does a receiver need to be able to do on the field to become a weapon, specifically for Cam Newton, and who are the early to mid-round guys that you see in this draft class that could do that?
Yeah, we talked earlier about an ability to separate. That's what a wide receiver needs first and foremost, beyond great hands, okay? An ability to separate. And how do you separate? And I think in the Carolina offense, they lost the guys that they traded last year, Kelvin Benjamin, that had size and an ability to win outside the numbers in back shoulder throws and contested throws. And I think that's what helps out Cam Newton more than anything. Rather than the timing, quickness, kind of get the ball out on time, anticipate wide outs, I think what Cam is best with is when he's got a big body he can throw to, that he knows where he's going to be and has a chance of winning the contested throw. The Devin Funchess, the Kelvin Benjamin, etc. So when you look at the wide receiver class this year, Cortland Sutton would be the potential first-round guy from SMU and I can't wait to see him at the Combine, but there's a bunch of big-bodied players that are going to be second, third, and even fourth-round players. Jamon Moore from Missouri, Equinemius St. Brown from Notre Dame, Simi Cobb, who's from Indiana, Alan Lazard from Iowa State, Marcel Aitman, Oklahoma State. They're third and fourth round people, and I apologize, guys, if you're hearing. I've got a guy blowing leaves or something outside my house. But so if you're hearing noise, I apologize. But that's kind of, there's a whole bunch of big-bodied wideouts in this draft, and I think they're the kind of guys that can help Carolina and Cam.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Adam Beasley with Miami Herald. Your line is now open.
Mike, first of all, thanks for doing this. Question Dolphins-centric. There's a lot of debate here whether if one of those top 4 quarterbacks falls to them at 11, they take him. Would you think that'd be a better idea for the Dolphins or going best player available?
I think the Dolphins are kind of at an important landmark in their franchise. I think it's year 3 of that regime. They've got a quarterback coming off an ACL that's around 30 years old and has not lived up to his first-round expectations. So I think you're at a point where you've had one good year and then one bad year with this group. And what's next? Are you going to hang your hat on Tannehill and say, that's our guy? Or are you going to try and be bold and go in a different direction? And I'm not sure what the right answer is. I think it'd be easier in that building to talk yourself into, we're not that bad, we're not that far away. If we can get in and Tannehill can play well, Adam Gase is a very good quarterback coach, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think you can talk yourself into that conversation that if Tannehill's our guy, it's not a rebuild. And what we need to do is fill in around them, be a better football team. And my gut tells me they're going to go in that direction. I think it's difficult to say, okay, if we're not going to sign a free agent quarterback, then, at number 11, who's going to be available at that point? And none of us know. Is it Baker Mayfield? Do you go in a completely different direction and go Lamar Jackson? Do you wait and go in the second round? And I think another way to kind of handle this is, do you take a quarterback in the second or third round? And I can't even remember I'm trying to remember what Miami has available.
They have their second and third round picks.
I'm sorry?
They have their second and third round picks.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember what they do, and I think they do also. But my point is, if one of those guys, a Luke Falk, a Mike White, if they like any of those guys, I think it's an insurance policy to back up the Tannehill thing. But that's a long way of saying that I think they're at a crossroads. I'm not sure what the right answer is, but my gut tells me they're going to hang with Tannehill.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Our next question comes from John Wilner with San Jose Mercury News. Your line is now open.
Mike, thanks for doing this. I was wondering if there are 2 or 3 Pac-12 players not named Darnold or Rosen that you're particularly interested to see this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to start with that Vita Vea from Washington. He is a dancing bear. He's a freak. He's 340 pounds, and everybody says he's going to run a sub-540. The last defensive lineman to do that was Dontare Poe, and he went at number 11. And Vea is a better player than Poe was coming out of college, more advanced. He's a plug-and-play nose tackle in any scheme. And if he runs 4.85 or 4.9 at 342 pounds, to me, that's more impressive than watching John Ross run 4.22. So, seriously, I mean, for me, that's first and foremost. Outside of that, who else am I intrigued about? I like the USC running back intrigues me, and I want to see him catch the ball and run routes. Of course, I'm talking about Ronald Jones. He's a track guy. He's going to run fast. But I really want to see him run some routes, and I can't wait to see him run routes at his pro day. And I think he's a guy that can be an immediate productive player in the NFL, and I think he's going to go in the second round. So there are 2 guys that I can't wait to see, and I'm excited about.
Thank you.
Yep.
Our next question comes from D. Orlando Ledbetter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Your line is now open.
Hello, Mike. Could you discuss what makes Roquan Smith, the first rounder at linebacker, and the Georgia running back, Sony Michel and Chubb, and then their rushers, Low Carter and Bellamy?
Yeah, I love Roquan Smith, and I think he's today's NFL off-the-ball linebacker, and it's mostly about speed. He's 225 pounds. Deion Jones was drafted in the second round in Atlanta 2 years ago, and he's been the prototype. And I think Roquan Smith takes it a step further. Very similar type guys. I love the way he plays. I didn't even know who he was the first tape I put in. I think it was Notre Dame, Georgia, and he just jumped off the tape. I got excited just sitting there going, who is this guy? The tailbacks, the more I watch Sony Michel, the more I think Sony Michel can make an impact like an Alvin Kamara in the run game. I think he has burst acceleration, better toughness than people think, better contact balance than I expected. What he doesn't have yet is the pass game ability Kamara did. I think he's got good hands, but I'm not sure yet because they didn't throw it to him too much. And I know he didn't run great routes. It was just check downs and flare screens. And so the combine and his pro day are very important for him. The other running back, Chubb, I think he's one of the toughest running backs in this class. Downhill, north-south, one cut, make you miss. I think he's a warrior, and I love him. He'll fit his own scheme and be a really good player. The edge guys, Carter, I like Carter. And I think Carter is going to go on the second day of the draft. He's got almost the same size as Leonard Floyd. His production wasn't the same. He needs to get stronger, as does Bellamy, Davin Bellamy, the other edge guy. And I think Bellamy will – I think Bellamy's has more upside than people give him credit for. And I wouldn't be surprised if he went in the fourth round or so, but I think Carter and Bellamy are both what today's 34 outside linebacker looks like.
Thank you, Mike.
Got it, Orlando.
Our next question comes from Matt Baker with Tampa Bay Times. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. I just wanted to get your thoughts on Antonio Callaway, the Florida receiver. Obviously pretty talented, but has a bunch of off-the-field question marks. I mean, where do you see him in his draft stock right now?
You're right. He is very talented, and you're right. He's got a lot of off-the-field stuff that is going to affect his ultimate evaluation, and that's why, quite frankly, what he does off the field at the combine is really more important. It's more about the meetings at night, the conversations he's going to have. Keep in mind, this is a guy that had three return touchdowns. I think it was 2 punts and 1 kickoff return, but he had 3 return touchdowns in 2 years at Florida, suspended this entire season. People will recognize his talent. They'll recognize his explosiveness and his ability to return the ball. I think he's going to be a third-day guy, and I think the team has to get comfortable with who he is off the field.
Thank you.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Herbie Teope with the New Orleans Times-Picayune. Your line is now open.
Hey, good morning, Mike. The Saints have lacked a dynamic receiving tight end threat in recent seasons, and I know you mentioned a couple tight ends earlier in the call, but who would fit the Saints scheme in your opinion?
I mentioned earlier that I really like Hayden Hirsch from South Carolina. He's 25 years old because he signed a baseball contract out of high school. But in addition to being able to catch the football, he puts effort into the run game. And knowing that the funny thing about the Saints, I believe, is that, when they won their Super Bowl and everybody talked about Drew Brees in the pass game, they had a commitment to the physicality of the run game. And they still do. And that's because of Sean Payton and who he is. So if you're going to bring a tight end in at a high level, I think you've got to have a commitment to block in addition to just being a pass catcher. And I think that's Hayden Hirsch. I think Goddard from South Dakota State, Gesicki from Penn State, and Mark Andrews from Oklahoma are all outstanding receiving options. None of them are primary blockers in the run game. At best, they're edge control on the backside. So if you wanted to go later and get just a pass catcher, you could look at a Troy Fumagalli from Wisconsin, who you could probably get in the fourth round. Chris Herndon is another guy from Miami I like who will block a little bit, but he's coming off an injury. There's a bunch of tight ends in this draft. 90% of them are pass only, receivers only. But there are a few, like a Will Dissly from Washington, who will stick his hand in the dirt and move people. But he doesn't have the same receiving skill. So every year we have the same conversation about college tight ends. There's only a few that will block, and then a bunch of receivers, and who fits what scheme the best. So if you look at a Zach Ertz in Philadelphia, I think that's what you're seeing with a Goddard, with a Gesicki, with a Mark Andrews, with a Troy Fumagalli. Those similar type guys, and I think could have a similar type impact.
Our next question comes from Dave Burkett, Detroit Free Press. Your line is now open.
Thanks for the call, Mike. Wanted to get your opinion on the offensive tackle from Western Michigan, Courier. I don't know if you've seen him yet, but just some thoughts on him as a prospect. Heard some mixed things on him. And then more generally, you mentioned the Lions and the interior offensive line earlier. How deep is this offensive line, the interior class? And, day 2 or day 3, I'm thinking for the Lions in that position.
Yeah, Courier is a guy I'm intrigued with, but he always kind of leaves me wanting more. And last year when I was watching Moten, who I believe went in the second or third round out of Western Michigan, I'm like, why is he playing right tackle, this Moten kid? And then I looked at the left tackle. I'm like, oh, that's why. They got a big, good-looking left tackle, this Courier. So I couldn't wait to watch him this year, and he's a big body. When you draw it up, what you want as a left tackle, it looks like him. He's got some movement skills. He's big. He can move people in the run game, but he's highly inconsistent, both in the run and the pass game. Doesn't have a lot of interest in the backside of the run game. I look at him as a talented player that needs to be a much more consistent player. But there's talent there. I think he'll probably go on the second day. As far as interior offensive line class, the top end of it's really good. And I mentioned Quinton Nelson will be gone early. I think the next group of guys, Isaiah Wynn, James Daniels, Will Hernandez, Billy Price, I think they'll all probably go, worst case, by the end, I think the end of the second to the beginning of the third. And then Frank Ragnow from Arkansas, Braden Smith from Auburn, and a guy who I really like, doesn't get enough publicity, is Corbett from Nevada, who played tackle, Austin Corbett, and I think he's going to get kicked inside and be a starting guard. That's 8 interior offensive linemen. That's the average for a group of interior offensive linemen in the last 5 years in the draft. So they're the logical guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from John Makota with Dallas Morning News. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, a little bit earlier you were talking about those edge rushers that could be available for the Lions at 19. I was thinking, or at 20. I was thinking for the Cowboys at 19, it could be something similar. I was wondering why maybe Hubbard or Harold, the other kid, wouldn't be a fit there. And then also I was wondering about maybe a middle of the draft receiving back. I know the Cowboys were interested in Donnell Pumphrey last year and weren't able to get him. I was wondering if there's anybody like that might fit this year.
Yeah, there are a bunch of good running backs that could fit. To answer your edge rusher conversation, it's depending on scheme, and Dallas is a 4-down team, and obviously priority number 1 for them has got to be to re-sign DeMarcus Lawrence. They don't have a lot of cap space, but I would imagine that's going to happen. I think Davenport will probably be gone by then, but if he's not, Marcus Davenport, to me, has got the most upside of perhaps any edge rusher in this draft. Arden Key from LSU, I mentioned earlier also. Beyond him, Sam Hubbard is not a dynamic edge guy, but I do think he's going to get hustle sacks, play the run really well, and be a rock-solid player in the NFL. Whether or not, I think he's more of a second-round pick than a first-round pick. Harold Landry is more of a 34 outside linebacker, so doesn't really fit your scheme. I think a guy that's interesting on the second day, Rasheem Green from USC, third-year junior, probably came out a year early. However, massive body. I don't think he's ready to handle the interior defensive line, just not strong enough yet. I think he can be a base end and kick inside to help the sub rush. I think he's an intriguing player. And then as far as the running backs are concerned, I'll tell you, when you get into that group, 7 guys go in the first 3 rounds, average for running back. So once you get into some of the third down change of pace guys, Mark Walton, from Miami. Had some injury issues, but quick, change of pace. Naeem Hines from North Carolina State, football and track, change of pace guy on third down, catches the ball extremely well. You could even get into Justin Jackson or Philip Lindsay in the fourth, fifth round type of players. Again, not big enough to carry the full load, but catch the football very well out of the backfield.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Jack with Toronto Sun. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. I'm not seeing any Canadians so far this year with draft grades, but I'm wondering first what you saw in the two Canadians at last month's Shrine game, University of Montreal receiver Regis Sibasu and University of Alberta offensive lineman Mark Corte. And second, if you have any assessments of UConn's Trey Rutherford, a tackle, and a tackle at Nebraska, David Knievel.
Oh, man, you're digging deep on me this year. Killing me. I would tell you the wide receiver at the East-West game and the interior offensive lineman both got high efforts for effort. I'm not sure. I don't think either of them is draftable, and I have not watched tape of the other two. So, unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of information for you this year.
No worries. Thanks, man.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Scott Patrick with the Chronicle Telegram. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, when you were talking about Josh Allen, how much of a concern is the completion percentage? Is that something you think can be fixed on the next level? And will the combine be important for him in that area?
I don't think the combine's important for him in that area. I kind of laugh because I've had quarterbacks over the years ask me and some of their agents, hey, should I throw at the combine? Jay Cutler's dad asked me at the Senior Bowl. You know, and I'm like, if I had an arm like your son, I would throw everywhere, anywhere, anytime, because it's just going to help. And I would say the same thing about Josh Allen. I don't really care if he throws it 8 yards over the guy's head. The scouts know that you're not throwing to your receivers. They just want to see the ball come out of your hand and what it looks like. This kid's got a huge arm. Just get out there and rip it. Have some fun. That's all they really want to see is the quarterbacks get out there loose and rip it. Now, the pro day is a different conversation. You know, the pro days, you want to go out there and you want to see, and this is kind of part and parcel of the same question, the accuracy. It does worry me that he was a 56% guy. I mean, I was going through a bunch of stuff a few weeks ago trying to figure out how many college quarterbacks with sub 60% accuracy or completion percentages ended up being significantly better in the NFL. And when you're talking about high-level guys, I mean, I think Matthew Stafford was the only one guy I could find that I think he was 55, 6, 7, somewhere like that at Georgia. And obviously Matthew Stafford's a franchise quarterback. So it's a difficult conversation. And I think with this kid, it starts with the ground up. And I don't think his feet and his eyes are connected. And that's a big, big deal with quarterbacks. He's the most physically gifted quarterback in this draft class, but he's got a lot of work to do on his footwork. I know he's doing it right now with Jordan Palmer, who he's working with. And what I would hope to see is by the time he throws the ball at his pro day, a more consistent thrower from the ground up. I don't want to see every fourth or fifth ball just get missiled somewhere where you go, where did that come from? So his team wasn't very good. You know, he didn't have a lot of receivers. You know, you can make up excuses, but at the end of the day, if you're taking a high pick on a kid with a 56% completion percentage, the anticipation better be that you think you can help that get over 60.
Do you see any comparison with Kaiser? I mean, he had the same accuracy issues once he got to Cleveland, and he's a big kid with a big arm too.
I think Kaiser was a different conversation. This kid's got a bigger arm, even though Kaiser's physical skill set was good. I thought he struggled in the fourth quarter of a bunch of games 2 years ago at Notre Dame. I think this kid is a better version, and I think their issues are completely different. I don't see the comparison.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Jerry Dulac with Pittsburgh. Your line is now open.
Mike, how are you? I had a question for you about inside linebackers. I don't want to compare anyone to Ryan Shazier, and the Steelers are picking 28, so any of the premier guys, obviously will be gone. But do you see some guys in the lower end who are that Shazier type, that sideline to sideline, explosive, quick guy who could be there, at their turn?
Yeah, Jerry. I would imagine that Tremaine Edmonds and Roquan Smith will be gone. A guy that I'm really intrigued by and I need to do more work on is Layton Vander Esch from Boise State.
Right.
If you put his tape on against Oregon, which I believe was his bowl game, it was as good an off-the-ball linebacker tape as I've seen in years. He goes sideline to sideline. He's great in the pass game. He's one of those guys that naturally slips under or over blocks to make the play. He's like 6'4", 240. I want to know what he's going to run at the combine. In my head, I've got an over-under at 4.65, and I'm hoping it's under. And if he runs in that 4.6 range at 240 pounds with his tape, he's going to go late first round, and I think he'd be a great fit in Pittsburgh.
Thanks, Mike.
You got it.
Our next question comes from Brooke Pryor with the Oklahoman. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. You had Mayfield, I think, at 4th in your quarterback rankings. How did the Senior Bowl affect his draft stock, and what does he need to show at the combine to improve his standing even more?
His tape is really good. He's close to a 70% completion guy. I'm not too worried about him being 6 feet or 6'1", even though there's a very small percentage of those quarterbacks. I think it really comes down to off the field, face-to-face, in the meeting rooms, with the decision makers, whether or not you're going to buy into his character and him being the face of your franchise. And I think there's some teams that are going to say, no, I see some talent, but it's not my guy. I think there are other teams that are going to go, oh, come on, it's no biggie. There's maybe some emotional, competitive immaturity, but outside of that, I'm good. But he still sparks that conversation with every team in the league. So when you say what can he do or not, I think it's less physically and more how he presents and whether or not a team can look him in the eye and say, yeah, that's my guy. That's the face of the future for my franchise. And, again, he's a different cup of tea for everybody.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Suzanne Halliburton with Austin American Statement. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. I was going to ask you about Baker. You answered a lot of my question, but tell me this. Is Baker considered a system quarterback?
It's an interesting question, and it's a really interesting question. I think the West Coast people would like him because he has a quick release, gets the ball out very quickly. The, quote, systems have been changing over the last 6, 8, 10 years because of the type of quarterbacks we're getting from college football. You could see what Doug Peterson did with the Eagles. When he had Carson Wentz, they were doing one thing. When they got Nick Foles, they were doing another. I think NFL coaches are doing a better job of getting college quarterbacks and setting the system up around what that kid does best. Look at Deshaun Watson last year. Bill O'Brien did a great job. So if you draft Baker Mayfield in the first round, you better set your system up around what he does well, as opposed to just saying, we're a West Coast or we're down the field or whatever you want to call it. So I look at him and I go, yeah, components of the West Coast system fit him well, but there's got to be components of the RPO, play action, get him out in the run. I mean, he's an exciting talent, and I think an intelligent coach will know how to use him to his best of his abilities.
Our next question comes from Gurin Emig with the Tulsa World. Your line is now open.
Yeah, Mike, I wish I had a different player to ask about, but I too want to touch on Baker for just a second, Baker Mayfield. whether or not you agree with the Manziel comparison, and I know there's a lot of debate whether that's valid, is it sticking to him as he goes to the combine with NFL people?
Here's what I would tell you. The world of 6'1" and under quarterbacks is a small one to start with. When you compound that with some off-the-field issues and an ability to extend the play and be athletic on the field, there are going to be comparisons whether he wants to distance himself or not. And I go back to what I said a moment ago, which is he's going to have to prove in the meetings that he is a different guy than Johnny Manziel, off the field especially. That he has a character where he's going to be the first guy in, the last to leave. You're not going to see any of the BS that you saw in college. You know, he's not going to be giving anybody the finger or whatever. He's going to be about business, and it's great to be exciting, and it's great to be excitable. But at the end of the day, you got to be a leader of a football team, and he's got to convince people that not only is he dynamic and a positive leader, but he's also going to be a great guy in the locker room and the face of your franchise. And that's his challenge. And whether he likes it or not, being under 6'1", having some off-the-field issues, and being an athletic quarterback is going to throw him into the conversation with Manziel. Just the way it is.
Right. Okay, thanks a lot.
Our next question comes from Mike Giardi with NBC Sports Boston. Your line is now open.
Mike, thanks for doing this. You mentioned Logan Woodside in sort of in the drive-by in your first conversation about a quarterback. I'm just curious, what do you see from him, how he played maybe against Miami? Does that shape how teams look at him? And just sort of maybe an overall projection for him.
Yeah. What I liked about him was he makes a lot of plays. And at the end of the day, I'm trying to remember which tape it was. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to look it up for you right now. I think he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder because he wasn't recruited and all the rest of that. He's a self-made kid. I watched 3 of his tapes, and he broke all of Bruce Gradkowski's records. Every ball was in a good location that I saw. His accuracy, forget, he was a 69% one year and a 63 and up. Forget those numbers. He put the ball where the receivers could run with it. So at halftime of the Miami game, they're up 16-10, and he continued to push the ball down the field. So the Miami game I really liked because that chip on his shoulder where why didn't you recruit me, you could almost see it on tape. So when I looked at him earlier, I kind of put he and Kyle Lauletta in the same kind of conversation because they're similar height, body types, etc. But I think Logan Woodside has not gotten enough credit, and he's a guy I'm looking forward to watch throw the ball at the combine.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Chris Brown with BuffaloBills.com. Your line is now open.
Yeah, Mike, just want to know what you feel are the 2 deepest defensive positions in this class and how many first-round grades you have on players at those 2 respective positions.
Okay, I think interior defensive line at the high end is outstanding, and I think at least 4 are going to go. Vita Vea, Payne, Maurice Hurst, Taven Bryant. Harrison Phillips from Stanford's an interesting player. B.J. Hill from North Carolina State. But I'm saying 4 interior defensive linemen go. I also think the off-the-ball linebackers are really good this year. Tremaine Edmonds, Roquan Smith, Layton, Vander, Esch, Rashaan Evans. I think those 4 have a chance to go as as off-the-ball linebackers. Typically, there's only 2 off-the-ball linebackers, so that would be a big year. I really like those 2 groups, and I think we're still trying to kind of get through the corners and figure out after Denzel Ward where everybody goes. But Josh Jackson, Mike Hughes, Isaiah Oliver, Jair Alexander, Davis from Auburn. I mean, there are 6 guys there. I think at least 4 of them are going to go in the first round.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Joey Kaufman with Orange County Register. Your line is now open.
Mike, I wanted to ask about Sam Darnold. With some of the USC quarterbacks that have gone into the NFL in the past few years, Leinart, Barkley, the track record hasn't been outstanding. Does that have any effect when teams evaluate Sam? And in general, do teams pay attention to how schools' previous guys have done when they're looking at guys like that?
It's an interesting question. I would tell you this. There are certain schools that have had a reputation, and this has nothing to do with USC. There are certain schools that have had reputations with NFL teams as being soft. Programs aren't run real hard. And there are certain schools that NFL teams love to go into because they feel like not only is the level of player high, but they're coached hard and they come out ready to play in the NFL. And so there's no doubt there's some of that. I think the USC thing with Sam Darnold really holds no water. It's a different coaching staff doing different things, asking him to do different things. I think he's a better player than Matt Leinart was coming out. I think Matt Leinart kind of rode the wave of an outstanding football team. I think Sam Darnold has just more individual talent, bigger arm, better athlete across the board.
Great. Thanks.
Our next question comes from James Capea with AL.com. Your line is now open.
Mike, wanted to ask you about a couple of Auburn guys, Kerryon Johnson, Carlton Davis, and Braden Smith. You've touched on a couple of them already, but just what's your initial assessment of each of those three?
Kerryon Johnson's just fun to watch. He's kind of a little bit long and leggy, sometimes presents a bigger target because of that, but he's so athletic, so tough. At the running back position, I mentioned 7 going the first 3 rounds. I've got him as a solid second-round pick. As far as Braden Smith, I think he's going to show off both athleticism and strength at the combine. I've got him as a second-round guard. I think he needs to be more consistent. To watch one tape, I think he's a first-round pick. Watch another tape, I think he's a third or fourth-round pick. Just needs consistency, and I think he'll get that going forward. And then Carlton Davis, the corner, he's your prototypical long corner. He can run, gets a little grabby, but I think he's a press corner. Right now I've got him in the second round. So basically I've got all 3 of those guys on the second day, predominantly the second round.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Mike Petraglia with CLNS. Boston, now open.
Thanks, Mike, for doing this. I appreciate it. Patriots have potential needs at corner and linebacker. I want to get your quick read on 2 Alabama types. I know you touched a little while ago on Rashaan Evans, but Ronnie Harrison as well. And what is Bill's unconventional approach toward the draft suggested to you about what way he might lean toward the end of the first round? That's a lot, I know.
Well, no, I don't think you can guess what Bill's going to do. I really don't. I think he's the smartest football person I've ever been around. And I think you mentioned 2 Alabama players, which brings up Nick Saban, who's one of the smartest football people I've ever been around. Those 2 guys are a little bit outside the box, but the way they run their program speaks for itself. So I would imagine, and I can't speak for Bill, but obviously Alabama players are interesting guys because when they come out, they've been coached hard. You know what you're getting. Rashaan Evans is a great off-the-ball linebacker. He can run, shows up in coverage, comes downhill, tackles. He's going either late 1 to early 2. Harrison, the safety, all over the field. I've got him as a second-round pick, but he could go in the first round. Again, I think he can drop down and cover people, but I don't think that's his forte. And in today's NFL, I think you're looking to get safeties that can drop down and cover a slot. He could, but I think he's better in the box. It's almost impossible to guess what Bill's going to do. Just when you think you think he's going to trade down, he trades up, or he signs, a future Hall of Fame wide receiver in free agency. You just never know with Bill, and I wouldn't even try to guess.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Zach Berman with Philadelphia Inquirer. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, you've seen Mike Mcglinchey for years. Now, what stands out about him now, and assuming the combine does not change much, what's the draft range for him?
Yeah, Zach, he's one of my favorite players in the draft because I know the kid. And that helps me with evaluation. I know what kind of kid he is. He's Matt Ryan's cousin. I saw this kid play football and baseball at Penn Charter High School. I know the kid well. I did Notre Dame games when he was young, and I've been around him when he works out in the weight room. So the reason I have him as the number one tackle in the draft, and by the way, I believe very much that those other tackles, Orlando Brown, Connor Williams, are in the same category as players, but I love two things about Mike Mcglinchey. I love that he got coached by Harry Hiestand at Notre Dame, which tells me when he comes out, he's going to be ready to play. And I don't care if you put him at right tackle or left tackle, he's going to be ready to play. And number two, his work ethic and passion for the game of football is unparalleled. So I know what I'm getting with that kid, and that's why I banged the table for him.
Our next question comes from Sean Isabella with CNHI Sports. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, you already talked about Baker, but just had a Big 12 question. Wondered what guys you were intrigued by or most interested in seeing this week from the Big 12.
Okay. We talked about Baker. I'm looking forward to seeing Mason Rudolph. He didn't get to throw or play at the Senior Bowl, so I'm looking forward to watch him throw and hopefully spend a little time with him. The wide receiver thing is always very, very interesting, and James Washington and Marcel Aitman are two guys that I'm looking forward to watch. I get frustrated a little bit watching Big 12 tape, and I know the Big 12 coaches probably don't like me for it. I feel like I know how well they're coached and how much talent there is on the offensive side, and I get frustrated when I just see guys running wide open all over the place, especially the wide receiver class. But I think Washington and Aitman are of interest to me. And beyond that, they're the four guys that I have at the top of my head, the two quarterbacks and those two wideouts. If there's anybody specific you want to ask me about, please do.
About Brown, Connor Williams, Jefferson.
Malik Jefferson, to me, is I love the way he plays, but he's going to have to be an off-the-ball linebacker in the NFL. Because of that, I think he's got some trouble getting off big bodies. I think he's more of a third or fourth round guy, Malik Jefferson. Holton Hill is intriguing. He's had some off the field stuff, obviously, but he's a long press corner, the kind of guy you draw up when you're looking at corners, along with the safety, Deshaun Elliott. I think I've got him as my sixth or seventh safety in this draft right now. I think he's a second-day pick. I think he's a competent zone player, comes downhill, strikes, and hits. Don't think he's a great man-to-man matchup guy, but I think he can handle tight ends and running backs.
Thank you.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Tim Bielik with Cleveland.com. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, I know you mentioned Sam Hubbard earlier, and I know I've seen him kind of – a lot of people have had him 1, a lot of people had him 2. He seems like he's kind of on that fringe. Obviously, I don't know how he can really improve his stock over the weekend, but what are the things that you think will be the ultimate tipping point as to he'll be a first because of this or he'll be a second because of this?
I think probably 95% of the hay is in the barn for Sam Hubbard. I think we know who he is. His tape speaks for itself. I think he can be a base end, and I also think he can be a 3-4 outside linebacker, which helps him being scheme diverse. He checks every box. He's got character, work ethic, toughness, all of that. If he went out there and ran 4.52 or something, we'd probably all go, oh, my goodness. We got to go check this out. We got to see if he plays to that kind of twitchy level. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think anything's going to push him up or down, to be honest. I think he's going to test fairly well. I think he's going to knock it out of the park in the meeting room. I think teams are going to love him. And at the end of the day, when you get down towards the bottom of the first round, if a team is looking for a, quote, safe first-round pick, he's your guy. If not, he'll slide into the second round.
Cool. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Cassidy Hill with rival Yahoo Sports. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. Thanks so much for doing this today. You talked a little bit about Antonio Callaway already, but what about the rest of these Florida guys? You have guys like Pinheiro, Townsend, Marcel Harris, Duke Dawson. After a season, or really 2 seasons, that have been sort of unremarkable, what do they need to show to guys this weekend, and where do they fit into this draft?
Can you tell me? I missed some of that. I think you were asking about the Florida players. You said you already heard Callaway, and then what did you say? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir, just about the rest of them as well. What do they have to show after a somewhat unremarkable season for the team, and where do they fit into this draft? Specifically for a guy like Eddie Pinheiro, can a team risk a higher pick on that kicker?
I got to be very honest with you. I don't know how to evaluate kickers. So what I do every seriously, I apologize, but what I do every year is like a week before the draft, I call 5 or 6 of my special team buddies around the league and say, okay, who do I need to know about and why? And are any of them? So I'm not there with kickers, and I apologize. I would tell you that Taven Bryant is a borderline first-round pick. I really like what he brings to the table. I think Duke Dawson, like his tape, I think his physical skill set lends itself mostly towards nickel, but I think he can come in day one, play special teams and nickel. I'm trying to think who else in the Florida team. Is there anybody else you want to know about?
Marcel Harris, we didn't get to see season with injury, but does he have enough tape to really speak for itself already?
I've heard it both ways with him. I think at the end of the day, at best, he's going to be a third-day decision. The durability is a concern with a lot of the teams.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Greg Allman with Tampa Bay Times. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, thanks for doing this. I had one to ask you about the Bucs at 7. A couple different directions they could go, and if you presume that there's probably at least three quarterbacks going ahead of them, likely Chubb as well, just what you see as a match for them and maybe the best use of that pick at number 7.
Yeah, they're an interesting conversation, and I look at that and I go, first and foremost, I think you're getting Noah Spence back, but you've got to get some pressure. You've only had 20, 22 sacks last year, so you're sitting at number 6 from an edge perspective. If Bradley Chubb was there, I think you'd run to the podium. First off. Second of all, Micah Fitzpatrick from Alabama can fit any need on the back end. You guys spent a first-round pick on Hargraves. He hasn't played where I expected him to play yet. Brett Grimes is getting older. T.J. Ward is a free agent, I believe. You can plug and play him any of the 4 starting positions plus nickel and dime linebacker. That's how good he is. So from my perspective, I think at 6, depending on how many quarterbacks go, even if I'd look at Chubb, Fitzpatrick, and Quinton Nelson, because I think Barkley will be gone.
Hey, Mike, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Matt Martle with Beatty Collegian. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. I just wanted to ask you about the 3 Penn State guys that kind of impressed at the Senior Bowl, Deshaun Hamilton, Christian Campbell, and even Troy Apke. And what do you think they need to do this weekend to really kind of keep that momentum going?
Yeah, basically, if they need to run fast, because that's, with Hamilton, in a 14-day period with the East-West game and the Senior Bowl, he helped himself as much as anybody in the country. I mean, I thought he got better every day, which says a lot, and coaches love that, the ability to process information and then execute it on the field the next day. So the East-West game helped him. Then he came out the Senior Bowl. So he went from kind of a third-day afterthought to somebody that's now potentially a third-round pick. Apke, the safety, was not he's a guy that's going to run fast, and I think he can play special teams for a period of time to earn himself time to learn how to play the safety position. And I think he can also play some dime linebacker. So I think Apke has some value as a late third-day pick. And you mentioned the corner, I believe, correct?
Yes, Campbell.
I like both corners, by the way. I like Haley maybe even better because I think he can play nickel. And even though he won't test well, I like Haley a lot. I think he's going to come in and compete and play nickel and be a better football player than people think. And I think Campbell is a long press corner, not as good off. So it's going to be the teams that want to press, and he's got to run well. That's kind of the question on him. So he needs to run well. And I'd love to see Haley sneak in a good time, too, because he's a good football player.
Thank you.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Ryan Cartjay with Southern California News Group. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. Thanks. Similar to Baker Mayfield, there seems to be, personality-based questions following around Josh Rosen, especially over the past season. How much do you sense teams are actually concerned about Rosen in that way? And how often, if ever, do you think players at high-profile positions like quarterback can tend to be downgraded even unnecessarily when questions like that swirl around for a year or more?
I think what's critical at the quarterback position is that you get to know the kid as well as you can. I even find from my own evaluation perspective, when I get to know a quarterback, I do a much better job. I jumped on the table with both feet with Carson Wentz because I got to know the kid. And when I've missed on quarterback, a lot of times it's been because I never met the kid, never had a feel for him. And I think to take it to a much further extreme, the NFL teams have to get to know these kids. What makes them tick? What kind of passion do they have for the game? What's their work ethic? How are they raising the level of play with people around them? Are they natural leaders? Are they the face of your program? All of those things are critical. And when you take a kid like Rosen, I've never met him yet. I've watched his tape. I've formed an opinion based on his tape. The next step for me, and I think what the NFL teams are doing a better job at, is spending time with these kids to getting to know them. And from what I've been told, he's a very intelligent kid, so that's not an issue. He can process information. He's really good understanding a playbook. I think what they want to get to know is, what's his passion for the game? Does he love it? Is he committed for the next 10 years to be the best he can be? Or is he going to be content with just being a pretty good player and hanging out? And it's nowhere more important in the NFL than it is at the quarterback position to find out what makes the kid tick. And I think with Josh Rosen, no different than any of the other guys, they're going to dig deep.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Garrett.raven.com. Your line is now open. Our next question, John Mcglinchey with Center Daily Times. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, you talked already about a few of the Penn State guys, but I wanted to ask you specifically about safety Marcus Allen and linebacker Jason Cabinda. What are your initial assessments of those two guys?
Cabinda is a pro. Just works hard. Is not as naturally gifted as some of those linebackers that are going to run 4 or 5 at the combine. But I watched him at the East-West game. After every snap that he came off the field, he went right up to the defensive coordinator, had a conversation. When the slot goes in motion, what's the check? I mean, he's a true pro. He comes prepared to play. I think he's a two-down player with some physical limitations that's going to make a living on special teams. Marcus Allen is a safety that's great in the box. He'll strike you. He'll get after people in the run game. I think he's got some range in the pass game, and I think he can cover running backs and to an extent tight ends. But I think the more athletic the game gets, the more he's going to struggle. But I think he's a starting safety in the NFL.
Our next question comes from Martin Frank with Delaware News Journal. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. I was wondering, like, the Eagles obviously are picking last in the first round, which is kind of a new position for them to be in. And I was wondering your thoughts on how that might change their strategy going into the draft, and what kind of players do you think the Eagles might be looking at that spot? Thank you.
Sure, Rube. I think it's probably 1960 was the last time they had picked last. But anyway, I think I have to preface it by saying the job that Howie Roseman did the last 2 years ranks up in the General Manager's Hall of Fame. And what they did with that roster and how they turned it over in a 2-year period to win a Super Bowl. And then when you look going forward, you realize that just every starter except, I think, Nigel Bradham is under contract for this coming year. And they've really positioned themselves pretty darn well, even to the extent that they've got a corner that they drafted in the second round last year coming off an Achilles tear that's ready to step in and play. So I'm just highly impressed with what Howie Roseman and that group has done. When you look at sitting at 32, and I've had this conversation with teams that are used to drafting late, I think you've got to be multiple, and I think you've got to be versatile. And by that I mean you got to get a good football player, but you also have to have an ability to move down if possible, if necessary. And the Eagles don't have, if I remember correctly, a 2 and a 3. So an ability to move down would be first and foremost in my mind. And a lot of teams like to move up to get quarterbacks at the end of the first round to get that extra fifth-year option. So sitting at 32 is a prime real estate for a move down. That's first and foremost. Secondly, if you're sitting at 32 and you're going to pick, you want to pick somebody that you think, I believe, that you think is safe. And I think Zach Berman asked earlier about Mike Mcglinchey from Notre Dame, and I know why Zach asked, and Mike Mcglinchey would be a great pick as a tackle at 32. I don't think he's going to last that long, but I think you're looking for somebody that you know you can plug in year one in your system and will contribute somehow. Regardless of the position, you better be comfortable with who he is as a football player, and he's going to come in day one and compete.
Thanks.
Our next question comes from Colleen Kane with Chicago Tribune. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, what separates Quinton Nelson from the other offensive linemen in this draft?
Good question. The first is DNA. You know, he's 330 pounds. He's got a nasty demeanor. He finishes with an edge. He's probably the best run-blocking interior offensive lineman I've seen in years. Plus, in today's NFL, you got to protect your quarterback. And every quarterback I've talked to in the NFL say what bothers them the most is immediate pressure up the middle. So you got a guy that can set a physical edge in the middle of your line up front and allow your quarterback to step up. That's a big deal. So he's great in the run game. He's very good in the pass game. He was coached by Harry Hiestand, who I think is one of the best offensive line coaches I've ever been around, who's now with the Chicago Bears. So he's got talent, he's got coaching, and at the end of the day, he loves football. I know this kid. He's got a passion for the game. He's got a passion to be the best he can be. So when you add all those things up, unless he's injured, unless he gets a bad injury, I love the fact that he can come in day one and be a high-level NFL player.
Thank you.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Ryan Young with Sec Country. Your line is now open.
Yes, thanks for the time. You talked about Taven Bryan a couple of times.
how high do you think he can go in the best case scenario? And is he a guy you expect to really impress at the combine with his strength and maybe boost his stock a little bit?
Yeah, I do. I think his tape's really good. Effectively a one-year starter, but I think what really is going to help him is the versatility of his game. He could play defensive tackle in a 4-3. He could play defensive end in a 3-4. You could probably play him, I know you could play him as a base end in a 4-3 and kick him inside and sub-package it. I think his value to teams, or they're going to look at him and say, okay, we know he's a tough kid and he can defend the run, but can he affect the pass game? And I believe he can. So regardless of your scheme, I think he can affect the pass game, and I think teams are going to look at him as an ascending talent, and I do believe he's going to go in the first round.
Thank you very much.
Our next question comes from Rick at TechFieldLine.com. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, thanks for taking my question. The Tremaine Edmonds was already talked about, but I had a question on Tim Settle. He's a guy that's been being mentioned more these last couple of weeks. What are your general impressions of Tim Settle, and what are maybe some issues that defensive linemen that come out as third-year players, he's just a redshirt sophomore, what are some issues that those guys face when they enter the league?
Yeah, I like Tim Settle, and he's one of those players I really didn't know anything about when I first put his tape in. And actually, I noticed him when I went in to watch Edmonds, and I'm like, who's this big dude in the middle? I mean, wow. And so I love it when I notice a guy when I'm not even studying that particular player. So when I went back in to study him, at 335 plus or minus pounds, he's got short area quickness that's rare. That's the first thing that jumps off is, can he affect the pass game at 335? Maybe. And that, again, that's rare. I know he can stuff the run. When he stays low and plays with leverage, he's hard to move, even with a double team. He's got short area quickness that he can threaten the pocket, and he plays hard. I can't remember which tape it was, but he chased down a screen pass about 30 yards from behind. You don't ever see 335-pound guys do that. So I really like everything I saw. We're kind of facing a changing dynamic in this draft with the underclassmen. More and more of them are coming out every year, even at positions we're not used to seeing them come out, like offensive line and defensive line. I think the hard thing for some of these guys to get used to is that in the NFL, and I'm not talking about this kid, I'm just saying in general, defensive linemen coming out early, every snap you have to play with your hair on fire in the NFL. Every snap. You can't take downs off. You got to make every snap count. And I think the rotation helps in the NFL, but I just think it's something that young players have to get used to.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Our next question, Tallahassee Democrats. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. Derwin James, positionless is kind of a term that gets thrown around with him. I was wondering what's your take on him and how much that positionless can really be an asset in today's NFL.
I'm sorry. What was the term you used? I'm sorry.
Positionless, and how versatile he is on the defense.
Yes. Yeah. When I put his tape in the first time, I thought I was going to kind of see a strong safety that was limited a little bit with movement skills, and that's not the case. It's a big guy. He's got easy movement skills. He can cover wide receivers. He can cover tight ends. He can go down in the box and hit you. So the versatility of his game is critical. And in today's NFL, which is a pass-first league, when you can drop a safety down on a slot and feel comfortable, that guy's worth his weight in gold. So he can drop down on a slot. He can play deep middle. He can play a 2-deep half. He can play dime linebacker and cover a running back. Today's NFL is a matchup league, and he's a matchup player. That's why his value is so high.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Our next question comes from Mark Emmer with the Des Moines Register. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple of Iowa Hawkeyes that might go in the first round. You mentioned Josh Jackson earlier. What does he have to show this week, and can he be a top 10 guy potentially? And then also James Daniels is very intriguing. What do you like about him?
Yeah, James Daniels, whenever you watch an Iowa offensive lineman, you know you're going to get a technique proficient guy, and that's what it is with James Daniels. He's a big, square dude, been coached very well. And let's face it, the Kirk Ferentz tree as offensive line coaches is phenomenal. So I know what I'm going to get when I get an offensive lineman from Iowa. And in the case of Daniels, not only is his technique good, but he's a big kid with physical ability. I think he could play all three interior offensive line positions, but being a center, for me, gives him more value. I think he's got a chance to go late first round. Josh Jackson, man, converted wide out. I've heard people talk about, is he the next Richard Sherman or whatever, but kind of intriguing that he came out early, 8 interceptions. I think he got his hands on 18 other passes, so he had 26 passes defended. What I like about him is he can play zone. He understands what the number 2 and 3 receivers are doing while he's out on number 1. He's got great eyes, great instincts, and he trusts them. It's rare when you get a corner that has great instincts. Look at Marcus Peters, an off corner with great instincts. And Josh Jackson, what he has to show is at what level can he run? Is he a sub 4.5 guy? Is he a sub 4.55 guy? Or is he a 4.6 guy? We're going to find out next week, and I think that's the big question on him.
Our next question comes from Mark Wogenrich with Allentown Morning Call. Your line is now open.
Mike, regarding Saquon Barkley, considering his film and his reputation, what will NFL personnel be looking for him from the Combine, and what does the Combine ultimately mean for him?
Really all it is confirmation of his physical gifts. And for a guy like Barkley who has worked so hard to develop his gifts, I mean, for him, it ought to be a victory celebration. Really should. He ought to come in and just knock it down, one drill after another, and he's going to walk out of there 4 days later, and everybody's going to go, wow, he's just as good or better than we thought he was. So when he goes into the meetings at night, he's going to blow people away also. I talk about the last 3 or 4 running backs that went in the top 10, which were what? Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott went at 4, Gurley went at 10, McCaffrey went at 8. So they're the last 4 top 10 backs. They've all helped their teams become better. I could make the case that this kid, Barkley, is the best of those guys, best of all 5 of them. He's clean off the field, and he'll be great in your locker room. I would be absolutely stunned if this kid doesn't go in the top 5.
Our next question comes from Christopher Walsh with Sec Country. Your line is now open.
Thanks. I want to ask you about someone a little different. Alabama running back Bo Scarborough. Obviously with his injury concerns, is this a guy who can really raise his draft stock at the Combine, and how do you kind of assess him?
I'm sorry. My phone just clicked out there. Can you tell me again? I thought I heard Alabama, but I didn't hear anything after that.
Sure. I was asking about running back Bo Scarborough.
Right.
Just how do you kind of assess him, a guy with, his injury issues and kind of been up and down, and is he someone who can actually really improve his draft stock at the Combine?
I think he's a player that teams look at with question marks, and the Combine is important to him because of that. I don't think he's ever had more than 125 carries in a year. So he's had a light workload, yet he's been injured a lot. That's a bad combination. Teams are going to want to get a look at him up close. They all know he was a 5-star recruit. They know what he looks like in the flesh. So he's a height, weight, speed guy that is probably going to test very well. And if he does, it begs the question, where was the guy that played the final 3 or 4 games of the 2016 season? That's the guy we want. So I think it's a combination of durability and just trying to get to know this kid, his work ethic and passion for the game. I think a lot of that's going to determine where he goes. And in my mind today, if I had to pick, I'd say he probably wasn't going to go till at least the 4th round, if not later.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Blake Topmayer with Knoxville News Centennial. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, with University of Tennessee running back John Kelly, what do you feel like his stock is, and what can he do at the Combine to improve it? And then a couple other Tennessee guys, Rashawn Golden and Khalil McKenzie, what do you see as their stock?
Sure. Kelly kid's interesting because if you put the Florida tape on, you go, wow, that was a good football game. And you see contact balance, a burst, and acceleration. His last 3 games, I don't know if it was him, his offensive line, or a combination, but they just look different. And you hate to knock a kid when the whole team is struggling like it was at the end of the season. But they look different at the end of the year. So I chose to kind of just take the Florida tape and say, okay, at his best, who is he? And at his best, I thought he was a mid-round player. Best case 3rd round, but I don't really think that's happened. I think he's best case 4th round, realistically, 4th or 5th round running back. I think if he runs well and catches the ball well at his pro day, that could really help him. Golden, the defensive back, he's kind of interesting. I don't know what he is. I mean, I watch him on tape. He plays nickel. He's tough. He hustles to the football. He's got some range. I want to see what he runs. I mean, he's 6'1". He might even play corner. I don't know. If he runs 4.48 or something, he might be interesting as a long corner. He also might be interesting as a free safety. But I know he can play special teams, and I feel like right now he's probably an early 3rd-day pick, but I think he could help himself. A lot of people were surprised that McKenzie came out this early. 5-star recruit. Pretty stout against the run, but right now there are more questions than answers about him. And I'm guessing he's going to come in and move pretty well because he's got some movement skills. But quite frankly, I was surprised he came out early.
Thanks.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Ryan Bink with BaltimoreRavens.com. Your line is open.
Hi, Mike. For the Ravens, how soon do you think they need to draft a quarterback to potentially replace Joe Flacco? And in this year's draft, if they get one, let's say in the middle rounds, who are some guys that could fit?
Yeah, I think right now they've got Ryan Mallett and I forget the 3rd guy, maybe Josh Woodrum or somebody, I forget. But anyway.
Yeah, they have Woodrum, but Mallett's a free agent.
Okay. So I think there are 2 questions here when you're talking about your quarterback, Joe Flacco. One is, A, the quality of play, and B, is the age. At this point, I think from an age perspective, I think he's fine. I don't think there's been any noticeable deterioration. I'm not sure everybody's excited with the way he's played since the Super Bowl year, but I don't think it's an age-related topic. I think they've got to get better on offense around them. But I do believe he and Matt Ryan came out in the same year, and you start getting into the league for 10 or 12 years and you're in your 30s, at some point you got to start drafting a potential backup. And I think the Ravens have to be in the quarterback market either with a kind of 3rd or 4th round potential player. We've talked about Mason Rudolph, Luke Falk, Mike White, Lauletta, Woodside, those kind of players, or they've got to be looking to sign a veteran free agent just as insurance, or both.
Thank you.
Yep.
That concludes today's conference call. Thank you, Mike, for the time today. Really appreciate it. And thank you to the media for joining. Again, live coverage of the 2018 NFL Scouting Combine kicks off Friday, March 2nd at 9 a.m. Eastern Time on NFL Network and continues through Monday, March 5th. Thanks again, Mike, and thank you to the media.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you all for participating. You may now disconnect.